I'm Pat Clark, marine scientist here at the Northwest Watershed Research Center here in Boise, part of USDA Agriculture Research Service. My major research is looking at grazing animal behavior and how that relates to rangeland vegetation and rangeland hydrology, water quality, water supply, and so forth. And that's all framed within kind of a treatment regime or what maybe impact those interactions between animals, vegetation, and hydrology, what we call landscape scale disturbance regimes. One of those is wildfire or prescribed fire. Another one would be invasive weeds, in this case here in Idaho. And throughout the northern Rockies, we can even consider the reintroduction of gray wolves into this ecosystem as a landscape scale disturbance. Just their herding patterns, how much time they spend in different areas, how much time they spend in critical habitats like riparian zones and areas where there's high quality forage, and how they use landscapes that are really brush encroached, and what the potentials are of environmental impacts. As I mentioned, prescribed fire is one. It's something that we've done out at Reynolds Creek Experimental Watershed on a couple different prescribed fires, the Breaks and the Whiskey Hill, and looking at how if we apply fire onto the landscape to reduce the brush cover and reduce the amount of juniper seedlings and juniper cover, how do cattle react to those kinds of treatments, particularly from a spatial context. And GPS collars really work great for that. One of the problems with GPS collars, however, is they're extremely expensive to purchase commercially, on the order of $4,000 to $5,000 a collar. And that really limits your statistical power, your ability to draw conclusions because your sample size is so low. We're also looking at how cattle respond to the reintroduction of gray wolves in the northern Rockies. And actually there's a sister project down in Arizona and New Mexico where they're looking at the reintroduction of Mexican gray wolves and cattle response there. So really the treatment in this case is the presence of gray wolves and whether their presence influences how cows use the landscape, how much time they spend in riparian zones, how much time they spend grazing versus bedding and those things. And again, GPS collars are a real natural fit for that kind of research.
ARS has been using LIDAR to survey the distribution of western juniper in southern Idaho. We're working with the Bureau of Land Management. They have an Hawaii Uplands pilot project for exploiting remote sensing tools for land management applications. LIDAR is light detection and ranging. The airplane version flies over the land at 700 feet or so, sends out 30,000 laser beams a second, and it detects how quickly those hit the ground or vegetation, and it creates a digital elevation map of the soil surface.
So what it does, it throws a light pulse out, whatever your sensor is, and then that light would bounce back. So it will record how much time it took for the light to bounce back from there, so it knows the distance.
With this remote sensing technology, you can overfly an area and analyze it and quantify where these trees are and where they're going. We set this up several years ago. We have a number of cooperators, Forest Service, Idaho State University, BLM. We're all working together out there. A large part of Hawaii County in southwest Idaho is in a juniper restoration area where BLM's priority is to remove the trees from their non-native habitat and retain them where they have historically been. Western juniper has been around for 10,000 years in this area, but it used to be limited to sites that don't get burned periodically by wildfire.
Juniper invasion is probably one of the biggest threats besides invasive weeds. The juniper, the conditions just seem to be ideal where they're expanding at a phenomenal rate. They impact forage for wildlife and livestock by extracting all the water that would potentially go into the grasses and forages, brushes for those plants.
Juniper is an invasive species. Somewhat depends on your definition. It's native to the region, but its normal habitat is restricted to those rocky outcrops that won't burn. A lot of the annual weeds we have around here are introduced species from other countries, but the definition of invasive is, are they moving into an area that they did not historically occur?
Back in the Smokey the Bear days, it was always the policy to put out any wildfire, no matter where it was, no matter what it might affect. Well, what has happened since then is that for the last 100 years, all the wildfires have been essentially put out. And what's happened is juniper has taken advantage of this now because wildfires were the actual check mechanism that kept them in place.
Juniper has a taproot, but it also sends roots out into the near surface layers, and it outcompetes everything in the understory. So you can have juniper move into an area and replace a diverse native sagebrush bunchgrass rangeland and end up with maybe a 34% canopy cover of juniper and almost no understory vegetation. The shrubs drop out and the grasses drop out. Those systems are actually fairly fire resistant, but when a fire does get going, it's a catastrophic crown fire that is actually more devastating than just a normal fire that in that zone would occur every 25 years or so. It's not sufficient to just remove juniper from where they aren't supposed to be. Once you remove juniper, you really have to reintroduce fire to the system to keep them under control. Juniper is very late in the stage of development of plant communities. It's normal for fire to disturb these communities. Historically, that's been in kind of a patchwork across the landscape. Fire frequency where we're looking at junipers might have been 25 years historically. We now suppress fire pretty effectively, and instead of resetting the successional cycle every 25 years, we let the shrubs move in and reduce the grass understory. Then juniper comes in and replaces everything else, and then it sits around in that state until there's a catastrophic crown fire.